Welcome to Life 101 Podcast. This is your host, Sanetta Diane. In this episode, we will pick up where we left off on discovering our love language. We have been discussing love languages in the last few episodes. We have two more episodes before we are done. In today's episode, I will be discussing receiving gifts, what that means as it relates to love language is receiving gifts is maybe what makes you feel valued, maybe what makes you feel loved and appreciated. As we consider love language, I want to remind you of a few things. A love language is what makes a person feel connected to another person, feel loved, and in many ways, it makes you feel vested, connected to a person or a group. Sometimes it's our children, sometimes it's a romantic relationship, and sometimes it's the parent child relationship. People often forget that relationship. Sometimes those dynamics are not close because the love language is misunderstood or not expressed. I'm not going to talk about the parent child relationship today. I just wanted to give that as an analogy. Okay. I want you to also consider that if your love language is receiving gifts, you may also like to give gifts as well. Most of the time, we have one or two. I haven't met anybody that have all of them. They might express them at different times, but they have a primary and they have a secondary way that they express love. In an earlier episode, I mentioned that we typically start expressing our love language in our environment when we are young, and it's often modeled to us as well. Now, with that being said, we don't recognize that's what's happening when we're young. As I told you before, I come from huggers. I didn't know that that was our way to express it. We just do it. We will say, I love you. We hug. It has been done for generations. And so it was modeled. It was not something that we were instructed to do, it was just modeled to do. So we often connect our love language maybe to a person, how they make us feel, not recognizing that it's the attention that they give us that makes us feel valued and connected. Oftentimes, when a person, your love language is receiving gifts, it's that maybe the person thought of enough of you to go out, prepare whatever they did, prepare the gift, go get the gift, order the gift. They went through the trouble to do all of that. That makes you feel valued. And oftentimes, when I talk about receiving gifts, people always think things. Sometimes it's not, it's your ability. You maybe go cut the grass or you may clean up the house. It's really you imparting whatever you can to let the person know that you value them. um, Receiving gifts can be abilities, it could be time, it could also be resources. So it's different ways to express receiving gifts. When we talk about receiving gifts, um, now I want, if we don't oftentimes get the gift, if your love language is receiving gifts and you don't get a gift, how do you respond? I'm pausing for a reason. If that is your love language and you don't get whatever, whether you don't get the grass cut or somebody doesn't call and check on you if you're under the weather or you don't get that card on your birthday, how do you respond? Do you feel as though maybe they don't know me very well or they don't love me, or do you feel no way at all? Depending on the relationship. If it's not a close relationship, most of the time people don't really talk about it or even care or notice. But if it's a close relationship and you don't get that time where that person is able to give you their abilities and cut the grass or come by and cook the meal, remember it's about receiving a gift, something tangible. Do you feel connected? The other question I want to ask is, does that person know that that's your love language? I'm pausing for a reason because if we're good friends, I think at some certain point, I should know what kind of makes you smile. Especially if we're good sister friends and we have been for some time. But if you're in your 20s and early 30s, most of the time, I'm not thinking about other people. I'm thinking about myself. Most of the time, not everybody is like that. But if you're not discerning, if you don't pick up what makes a person happy, how do you know that's their love language? How do you know that that's what makes them feel valued and appreciated? You don't. And the bigger question I want to ask you, do you know what makes you feel valued? Do you know what makes you feel connected in love? Some of us in our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s and 80s, we don't know. We don't know that's what it's called. We don't know that when you come and you cut my grass, that makes me feel valued in your eyes, that I am worth whatever you had to rearrange to come cut my grass. I don't know that about me. And that's another whole podcast. We're not talking about that one today. I'm just saying, don't expect another person to know you when you don't know yourself. You need to know who you are so that you can begin to express that to other people. I'll pause right here because if we don't know what makes us feel valued and appreciated, oftentimes that good sister friend, that good friend, that caregiver, or that loved one, they don't either. Give them grace because if you don't know, how will they? And I will say, not making excuses, give yourself grace to know who you are, that you're still learning. And I don't want to segue too far away, but I want to say in this part here, I met a lady. She was in her early 90s. I think she was 94 at the time. And I was doing some graduate work, and I was so struck by how young she looked and how vibrant she was and articulate, and she was very her cognition was good, and she told me some things as I asked her some things about herself, and she said something to me that has stuck with me many years later. She said to me that you will always be changing as long as you're here. Wait, I was staring. I was like, what does that mean? What you mean? Well, it took me some years to understand what she meant. She meant that as long as I am living, I will always have changes on the inside and on the outside. Well, oh my goodness. What a revelation. I did not know that. I thought you get to a certain age, you're good. Hopefully your mind will keep growing. But I thought my body, I'll be good and, life would be good. I had no idea that as long as I live, I will be changing in my mind, hopefully, but also in my body. And that is what she was trying to tell me. And so that is what I say to you today. As long as you live, you will always be changing. What you enjoy today and what makes you feel valued today, it may not in 5 years. And if you think about in your early 20s, for those that have passed your early 20s, what you valued then, you surely don't value now. At least I don't. Most of us have changed. So think about that for the people that are in your circle. They're still learning too. Give them that time to learn what you care about. That is one of the main reasons I started this podcast so that I could maybe give words to how people feel so that they can become more self aware, and really just to understand what makes them feel valued and learn who they are and learn who they're not. Because many people, they have a face that they put on for the crowd, and I'm not saying you're being fake. I'm saying they're still learning who they are, and they're different in different circles, and that is okay. But learn what you enjoy and what you don't care for, because life will be more peaceful for you when you know who you are and know who you're not. Okay, I will stay on task today. Back to receiving gifts. And so if you think about receiving gifts, what is it about receiving gifts that make you feel valued? Think about that. When did you connect to receiving gifts to feeling secure, to feeling valued, or do you? Now that you think about it, do you feel valued when someone gives you something, whether that's their time, their abilities with cutting the grass or making a meal for you, or whatever that receiving gift thing is? Do you feel valued? Or did the podcast open your mind to help you see, well, you know what? I do feel some connection when somebody does something for me tangible. How do you feel? And what if you don't get a gift? Understanding that is your love language. How do you respond? Especially if it's somebody important to you. Think about what I said. Do they know that's your love language? Especially if you're just finding out. Okay, that's another conversation. We're not going to go down there. Okay. I will backpedal on something I mentioned about my granny a couple of episodes ago. One of her love languages was giving gifts. And I think about hindsight that she also enjoyed getting them as well. Um, she never really said anything about receiving gifts unless you were the one who gave it to her and you mentioned it, but she never really talked about that. I come from generations of givers, and I've pondered something. How is it that we in my family, we're just a family of givers, that we give to other people, family members, and we give without reservation. That's just who we are. Now, we use wisdom, but we're just givers. We give of our time, we give of our abilities, we give of our attention, we give our resources. As it relates to my granny, she was one of 13 living children. Um, I found out a story about her after she died that when she was a teenager, she would give her parents her whole check. She worked in the theater. She would give her parents her check. And I thought, I didn't know that about her. I didn't learn that about her until she passed away. One of my mother's youngest sisters told me that story. Well, many moons later, in my early 20s, while I was in the military, all of my needs were met. I would send my check to my mother. Why did I do that? My mother worked. My sister was the only sibling at home. She didn't need it. I did it because that what was in me. Remember, I said I didn't learn about my grandmother until she had already passed away, which she did with her parents. And I was in my 40s when my grandmother passed away. And so when I started doing whatever with my mother, I was in my 20s. So my grandmother was still alive at that time. Nobody knew I did that unless my mother told them. I didn't tell them. Why did I do that? I don't know. It was in me. That generational gift to give was in me. That what it wasn't modeled to me in that way. And I say that to tell you that some love languages are generational. Some of the things that we do, we don't know why we do it. It wasn't anything that was instructed to us. We just do it. Think about your love language. Is it generational? Maybe you didn't see it being done. You just do it, not knowing that other family members do it as well. And sometimes our love language is not expressed in our family. That may be the reason we do it. And so I wanted to make sure that I kind of pondered, give you something to ponder on both sides. In my family, we just get generational givers. In my family, we have many such stories. They are not announced, they are just done. And it's done in secret, but it's not done in secret that we don't want anybody to know. It's done in secret because it's what's in us and it's just not mentioned. And so I want you to kind of think about your love language. Is this something that you just do, not knowing that it is generational? And it is pivotal that you learn your love language. It matters so much because it helps you to become who you were always meant to be, and maybe sometimes set you free on who you really are to begin with. A lot of times we're different people around other people because we can't be ourselves. Not understanding that knowing who you are as it relates to your love language, it brings you a peace. It brings you understanding. It brings you wisdom. It brings you insight, not just for other people, but for yourself. So, thank you for listening. You have been listening to Life 101 podcast, and I'm your host, Sanetta Diane.